It's a great event that we're having today.
And it was also 25 years ago this month that President Gordon B. Hinckley dedicated this monument behind me.
And the monument was brought across town on a flatbed trailer.
That they would be held in honorable remembrance through the latest generation.
I'm Richard Burton. I'm the Vice President of the Tucson Mormon Battalion Monument Foundation. I was the original president of the foundation when the monument was erected and helped with the fundraising and all of that took place. So it's a great event that we're having today here in the park, commemorating the 175th anniversary of the time the battalion came into town. But it's also commemorating the 25th anniversary of the actual erection and dedication of the monument. The celebration that we're having today, as I say, is the 25th celebration, and it's been in the planning now for probably 5 years. We have locally the Tucson Mormon Battalion Foundation, and it is comprised of interested people who want to volunteer and help in events such as this, who are willing to volunteer some of their time with reenactments, with organizing informational firesides. We get involved with the rodeo parade every year in February. That's always an opportunity for somebody to help.
Bands often accompany military units. However, there is no record of a band having been associated with nor attached to the Mormon Battalion. This fictitious group of musicians was formed in 2012 to participate in the Tucson Rodeo Parade as a representative historical brass band. The band performs for firesides and events to hold in honorable remembrance the legacy of the Mormon Battalion.
I'm Randy Madsen. I'm representing Lieutenant Colonel Philip St. George Cook, who was the leader of the Mormon Battalion from Santa Fe to San Diego.
And I'm Kathy Madsen, and I belong to him, but I'm representing the women of the battalion, and there were 5 women who marched the entire battalion trek and ended up in San Diego.
So this idea is the efforts of Dave Barnhill, who's also part of the foundation. He has been doing this for several years, involving the youth here in the Sierra Vista area.
The commemorative hike takes place every December, the second Saturday of December. I've been doing this hike with our church youth group for the last 5 years. This will be the 6th year that I've done this, but in conjunction with the 175th commemoration of the Mormon Battalion, I felt that it was necessary to invite the public and to make this a public event so the public can know and understand the history of the Mormon Battalion, the sacrifices that the men who marched with and in the battalion, and also the women. There were women who were marched with the battalion. The exact route of the battalion's march through the area is not known, but generally they would have stayed close to the river, so they would have had water for the animals and for the soldiers. This monument was erected in 1960 by a youth group from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in commemoration of the Mormon Battalion's march through the area, to commemorate their memory and to better understand the history of this area.
The 9-mile hike, we just had a couple kids complete that, and there's about 45, 50 people hiking today. We would hope that this activity would continue. Having 50 people out here today has been a lot of fun, and I hope that will continue. We've added so much in the last several years to our activities. One of the things that we've added is the swaggin'. And it's drawn so much attention, and people really seem to love it when we bring it wherever we are. The last several years we've been to the American Heritage Festival in up in the Gilbert area where there's 4,000 or 5,000 school kids who are there and see the wagon and love the wagon, want their pictures taken in front of the wagon, and we're able to tell the story of the battalion while they're there. And we just hope everybody understands the legacy that the battalion left. And we will do whatever is in our power to keep doing events and things like this so that we can educate people and help them understand their history.
It's great to see you all here today. It's a pleasure to be part of this 175th commemoration, and to have so many people who were contributors to the monument that stands behind us. So 175 years ago, a small group, 350 men and women, marched to the Presidio after having traveled some 1,500 miles from Council Bluffs, Iowa.
Sorry, excuse me.
And they were the Mormon Battalion on their way to San Diego as part of General Kearny's Army of the West. Brother Metcalf is going to follow me with some more detailed information about the battalion, and I'm looking forward to that, as I'm sure you are. But I'd like to take just a few minutes that I have remaining and talk a little bit about the history of this monument that we see behind us. For many years, there was a small plaque over here in Presidio Park. It was about 12 by 12 inches near the ground, and it said, "The first American flag raised here in 1846. Period." Nothing about who did it, why, or how. A small group of people back in 1989 decided that something ought to be done with that, and they gathered, started talking about, well, we ought to get a bigger flag. And something that's going to be a little more descriptive. And the group grew, and the project grew, maybe to a larger plaque with a bas relief on it, or possibly 3 or 4 plaques. And then somebody suggested, well, maybe we ought to have a bronze figure. Well, all of that culminated in what you see behind us now, 3 heroic-sized figures in bronze, 6 plaques describing in detail what took place here, and a beautiful platform with all the surrounding that you can see. The monument is titled The Exchange at the Presidio. And the exchange that is represented on the monument is basically for some food, for some European clothing that was carried by the officers. But that exchange is just symbolic. The exchange that really took place was something much more dramatic. This was a peaceful opportunity for 2 cultures to get together at a time when there was a war between their countries. It was a time when they could share. It was a time when things could be done without rancor or anger or frustration. It was done at a time when there was much need and help was given. So the exchange represents that kind of opportunity that was given to the battalion, and the battalion gave at the same time. The exchange is also representative of the things that took place because the battalion came here. For many years, many seekers of the westward movement used the southern route across the United States and came through Tucson, following the Mormon Battalion Trail, the Butterfield Stage, the Southern Pacific Railroad, and even Interstate 10 used part of that same trail route, and it made Tucson the culturally diverse and beautiful city that we all enjoy now. It is for those reasons that this monument, I think, represents an exchange much greater than what you just see represented by some bags of beans. Obviously, the cost for the monument went from a few $100s for a new plaque to over $250,000 in funds of 25 years ago. And those contributions that came to make it possible were provided by very private contributions church did not involve itself in funding monuments, so all of it was private. Small contributions and a few larger contributions that made it possible. There are a lot of miracles that took place, small and large, in the fundraising to make it possible for the foundry to be paid, the artist to be paid for all the concrete and other work that had to be done. The fact that the monument is located here in Presidio Park is in itself no small miracle. The group who put this all together, the monument, decided that it could be no better place than within the confines of the original Presidio walls. And Presidio Park was the ideal spot for that monument. Parks and Recreation for the city, after some discussion and some effort, agreed that this would be the place in Presidio Park for the monument. But it's interesting. This beautiful park that we see here is owned by the city of Tucson. Below this park is a subterranean garage. It's owned by Pima County. So approvals had to go through both the city of Tucson and Pima County, and the city of Tucson would not allow a monument, the city fathers, without the approval of the Pima Arts Council. And that was no small opportunity for us to overcome. Ted Ramirez, who was instrumental in helping us get through the Pima Arts Council, was the great-great-grandson of Teodoro Ramirez, who's represented on the monument. And it was used as the model for the figure that you see there. Other figures on the monument are Captain Jefferson Hunt, the ranking Mormon officer in the battalion. And he's seated. And holding the flag is Christopher Layton, Private Christopher Layton, who is reported to have raised the first American flag in Tucson. The fact that it is built over a garage is kind of incredible. We received some drawings from the county engineer, and it showed that this specific location was halfway between two concrete girders in the garage below us. You can imagine the difficulty that would take place with a monument of all this concrete and bronze being built right over that kind of structure and in between the structural members. That was going to require us to put some concrete girders between those girders that are already there, just to support our monument. Funds we didn't have, time we couldn't have. But our contractor, Bernard Lawfield, who we all appreciate very much, he decided that he was going to look to find out if there wasn't some other solution. And he actually came and took measurements from the little building you see behind the monument. He measured downstairs to the girders. He measured upstairs to the location of the monument. And miracle of miracles, the actual construction put our monument right over one of the girders, eliminating the need for us to create any of that structure that we would have had to have done. The county engineer didn't believe it. The drawings didn't show it, but he had to come and prove it to himself. And we were able then to move forward. But at that point, we were so far behind schedule that Brother Lawfield and his band of volunteer constructors had to work night and day, literally, to have it done in time for the dedication, with President Hinckley coming to do that dedication. It was completed, and the monument was brought across town in a flatbed trailer in early morning hours to try and miss any kind of traffic issues. And it was placed with a crane on top of the pedestal you see behind us the day before the dedication. So we have a lot to be grateful for. And I can tell you that the blessing, the opportunity to be part of that was something that I will always cherish, and many others will as well. Many might scoff when I say my testimony to this monument is the result of a lot of small and large miracles. But it's also not just those miracles. It's the product of many men and women who sacrifice a lot of time and effort and funds to make it possible. But I know it came about because we are answering the call of Brigham Young to fulfill his promise that their names would be handed down in honorable remembrance to all generations. The monument is here, and we are here in partial fulfillment of that promise. And I bear witness to that fact in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
I would like to tell you that I have a testimony, like Dick said, that about the small miracles that happen. And they happen every day along the way. And we were trying to find someone to speak at this commemoration, and I just so happened to be called a bishop in March of the Tucson Single Adult Ward, and we had organized it there, and I met one of the sisters in there, Sister Amy Cook, and I asked her what she did for a living, and she says she works for the church's historical department. And of course, the Spirit tapped me and said, hey, take advantage of this. And I asked her, well, do you know anybody that would come here and share with us their perspective of the Mormon Battalion and what happened at this time? And that was how I got in touch with Brandon Metcalf.
Well, I am so grateful to be here. I've joked with several that what a great time of year it is to escape Salt Lake City and be in Tucson. I grew up in the Sacramento area, so these are my kind of winters. I'm not a snow guy, so what a wonderful time. But I'm truly humbled by the invitation from the foundation to be here. I'm especially thankful for Rick and for Kathy Madsen and Bob Black for making this such a wonderful experience being here and being with you all. This is the second time I've visited Tucson, and this time I'm even more grateful as I think about the route that the Mormon Battalion took through Arizona in December instead of being somewhere in the frigid Rockies or Canada or somewhere like that. So what a great idea that they came through here in December. So I'm truly honored to be with you today as we celebrate two anniversaries. One is the 175 years ago today that the battalion actually departed Tucson on their journey after 2 days stopping over here. And it was also 25 years ago this month that President Gordon B. Hinckley dedicated this monument behind me. On that occasion, President Hinckley noted that the battalion arrived in Tucson in very bad condition, and it was one of their very important stops. He praised the efforts of those like Dick who played a role in creating the monument, stating that it was a memorial to their courage, to their valor, and their confidence in their leaders, to their absolutely dogged marching ever westward to build a road to California. This monument has served as an impressive reminder for 2.5 decades now to all who visit this plaza of the sacrifice of those that participated in the march, as well as the hospitality of Tucson residents. Before I discuss the Mormon Battalion and how Tucson fits into the story, I want to provide a brief overview of the Church History Department's monumental efforts to collect, preserve, and share Latter-day Saint history, which includes the history of the battalion. There are few organizations in the world that are better documented or devote so many resources to the preservation of its history. This record-keeping effort began on April 6, 1830, on the day Joseph Smith and a small group of followers formally organized the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Fayette, New York. That day, several revelations were received that are now canonized in the Doctrine and Covenants. One of them began, "Behold, there shall be a record kept among you." Initial responses to this divine mandate to keep a record included the creation of minutes of meetings, written copies of revelations, licenses certifying individuals' priesthood office, journals, letter books, and other administrative records. Within weeks, Oliver Cowdery, who had served as a primary scribe of the Book of Mormon, was appointed to be the first official record keeper, a position later referred to and still today as church historian and recorder. Although Joseph Smith did not come from a record-keeping tradition, it became a personal priority over time. 12 years after the church was formally organized, he initiated 5 significant record projects: a revelation book, a minute book, his first journal, a history, and a letter book, all in the same year. So despite his efforts and him being nudged to keep this mandate of keeping a record, he remained very aware of his literary limitations, expressing his frustration with, quote, his inability to conveying my ideas in writing. And he has often assigned clerks to keep the records for him and with him. Other scribes and clerks followed Oliver Cowdery, and their collective set of records were eventually boxed up and came by wagon to the Salt Lake Valley in 1848. An archives and a historian's office were soon established in Salt Lake City, initially occupying a wing of a modest home. In addition to official church records, journals and letters produced by Latter-day Saints, artifacts and published works were accumulated and added to the collection. As the church's archives grew, it resulted in periodic moves to larger facilities to store and access the records. In 2009, the state-of-the-art Church History Library in downtown Salt Lake City was dedicated, including a dozen environmentally controlled vaults to properly care for and store the church's most significant historical records. The volume of the rich documentary record of the church and its members is remarkable and includes millions of official documents, journals, letters, photographs, local histories, patriarchal blessings, art, artifacts, audiovisual material, books, periodicals, maps, electronic records, and oral histories. Today, the Church History Department employs a couple hundred staff as well as a couple hundred volunteers that work in both the library and the Church History Museum. This represents experts from a variety of disciplines, including archivists, conservators, curators, historians, librarians, preservation specialists, and writers. Major projects that some of you may be aware of include Joseph Smith papers and the 4-volume history called Saints that is ongoing. We have staff acquiring and cataloging thousands of different collections and publications that are brought in and assisting researchers in a variety of ways. We also digitize materials so that you can access those online. So it's through the effort of record keepers, both past and present, that we even have details about something like the Mormon Battalion. If these diarists had not taken the time to record their experiences, our knowledge of the past would be severely limited. One historian noted that the battalion probably holds the prize for the most journals and diaries per capita of any military unit in history, with nearly 80 separate records coming from a body of just 500 men. Perhaps that's the first lesson I'll point out today that we can learn from the Mormon Battalion. Keep a record. While facts and dates are interesting, it's the personal first-hand accounts that bring people and events to life with authenticity. Many of those who kept journals likely had no idea at the time that they would be preserved and referenced for generations to come. Reading their entries provides a peek into their inner feelings and emotions as they encountered hardships, allowing each of us to relate and to sympathize. Your own personal records can do the same for you and future generations. It has been said that a life that is not documented is a life that within a generation or two will largely be lost to memory. Our writings have a permanence to them by perpetuating one's memories and experiences beyond the grave. If you are not currently keeping a personal history, think about doing so. The abundant records created by the Mormon Battalion have resulted in the publication of numerous articles and books detailing their journey. So I have wondered, as I thought about this event today, what in the world can I add that hasn't already been written or spoken? And many of you may be thinking, that was so long ago, who cares and why does it even matter to me? Throughout my career studying history and working closely with manuscripts and the records of the past, I have learned to come to appreciate the lessons inherent in history. We often go about our daily lives without ever giving a thought to history, but no matter how disinterested you may be in history, you are affected by it every day. Our past has everything to do with our present, where we live, what language we speak. Even our culture is shaped by the past, for good or bad. Things may have been completely different had decisions and outcomes taken alternate courses. For me, that is one of the fascinating nuances of history, the profound influence of decisions made by our predecessors, not only on the grand scale or major turning points, but the seemingly less significant responses to regional and local happenings. In our short time together, I hope to supplement what you may already know about the battalion with a deeper sense of their trials and resilience and how their example can strengthen us all. Let's take a closer look at how the Mormon Battalion came to be and how in the world they ended up in Tucson back in December 1846. Between 1839 and 1846, the headquarters of the church was established in Nauvoo, Illinois. At its peak, Nauvoo numbered over 10,000 residents, making it one of the largest cities in Illinois at the time. But persistent persecution by local mobs at odds with church beliefs and practices forced the evacuation of Nauvoo a year and a half after the murders of church leader Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram. Fleeing their homes with minimal supplies, the first three waves of Latter-day Saints fled across the Mississippi River in early February 1846. This was the latest in a string of forced migration since the church's founding in 1830s that saw Latter-day Saints move from New York to Ohio, from Ohio to Missouri, and from Missouri to Illinois. With no intervention or protection from federal or state authorities, they sought to distance themselves from the United States by relocating to the Rockies in what was then Mexican territory. The first leg of their journey across Iowa took much longer than anticipated, being plagued by relentless rains and poor roads, which created what one diarist referred to as one continuous mud hole. No offense to any of those from Iowa, but at the time it was referred to as a continuous mud hole. Under the direction of their new leader, Brigham Young, an advance company reached Council Bluffs on the banks of the Missouri River in mid-June. It was too late in the season to push on, and they determined to establish a temporary settlement there until spring. Within a few days of that decision, a contingent of United States Army arrived to enlist a 500-member battalion to march towards Mexico to participate in the Mexican War. Thousands of Latter-day Saints at the time were strewn across a 265-mile stretch of Iowa in makeshift camps. And to the rank and file church members, this request to enlist in the army to fight in a war was unexpected and somewhat insulting to these individuals. Why in the world would they send any aid to a country that had repeatedly refused to protect them against ruthless vigilante violence wherever they ended up? However, this request for recruits was not by happenstance or some desperate appeal by the U.S. Army. Before leaving Nauvoo, Brigham Young assigned a man named Jesse Little to petition the federal government for assistance in relocating to the West. A letter was sent to President James K. Polk, President of the United States, detailing plans for the church's removal over the prairies and Rocky Mountains to find a new home in the wilderness. To help persuade President Polk, this letter included idle threats and warned that if necessary, the Latter-day Saints would cross the trackless ocean and negotiate with rival federal governments for assistance. After receiving Little's letter, President Polk agreed to visit with Little in person. And after considering the matter, President Polk determined that he would assist church leaders in hopes that they would remain allies not only during the war but afterwards, as they settled in the vast territory mentioned earlier, known as Alta California. At the time, Alta California was a massive piece of land encompassing over 600,000 square miles, including present-day California, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, western Colorado, and southwest Wyoming. So it's huge. Soon a military expedition was dispatched under the leadership of Colonel Stephen Kearny, with authorization from President Polk to, quote, receive into service as volunteers a few hundred of the Mormons, to conciliate them, attach them to our country, and prevent them from taking part against us. One of Kearny's subordinates, Captain James Allen, traveled to Latter-day Saint camps and with the endorsement of Brigham Young, recruited 5 companies over a 3-week period. On July 16th, 4 full companies and part of a 5th enlisted in the Army for 1 year, becoming the only military unit in American history to be recruited based on religion. 2 days later, church leaders met privately with the battalion members to give them the last charge and blessing that included a promise that their lives should be spared and our expedition result in great good, and our names be handed down in honorable remembrance to all generations. Brigham Young instructed company captains to act as fathers to their men and promised that they would have no fighting to do. The age of these enlisted members of the Mormon Battalion ranged from 14 to 67, with an average age of about 27 years old. A number of these men received permission for their families to accompany them. More than 30 women and over 40 children traveled partway with the group, although most of them detached from the battalion in Santa Fe and wintered in Pueblo, Colorado, before pushing on to Salt Lake. But most of these soldiers did not bring family members. These were young men abandoning loved ones and unsure of what lay ahead. Emotions ran high, as noted by one soldier who worried about not knowing how long we should be absent, and perhaps we might never see our family members again in this life. They viewed their enlistment as a call from their spiritual leader rather than a patriotic duty. Even still, it took some convincing and required great faith and sacrifice. Zadok Judd wrote, "This was quite a hard pill to swallow, to leave wives and children on the wild prairie, destitute and almost helpless. But the word came from the right source and seemed to bring the spirit of conviction of its truth with it. And there was quite a number of company that volunteered, myself and my brother among them." Another captured the hostile feelings of many of the Latter-day Saints at the time toward the U.S. government, who had failed to protect them from injustice and mob violence. Quote, "For the government to make such a demand when we were driven from our homes and possessions and were scattered upon the plains from Nauvoo to the Missouri River was more cruel than the grave." James Brown added that he did not suppose there was an individual in the battalion who, had he been left to his own thoughts and feelings, independent of counsel, would have enlisted. "I would have felt very reluctant under the circumstances had it not been for the counsel of my brethren, whom God directed to dictate the affairs of his kingdom." Let's pause here for a minute. Knowing how past events turned out with the benefit of hindsight often prevents us from processing the magnitude of how these individuals felt at the moment. They were heading into the unknown with no idea how things would play out. Few, if any, had served in the military before. Would they fight? Would they starve or perish in the unforgiving desert? Would they be expected to re-enlist? When and how would they reunite with their families and friends? Would their families survive the elements and the long journey west? We should also note that in addition to countless worries over their physical health and safety, their only mode of communication was by handwritten letter, and there were no post offices on the corner. They relied on military and private couriers. Today's instant communication is a recent phenomenon. In the 1840s, there were no telephones, let alone modern amenities like FaceTime, email, texting, or social media. The telegraph was just emerging. And in the remote Southwest, contact was limited by the speed which a messenger could travel by horseback. So exchanging letters in 1846 with family, friends, and others was unreliable and could take weeks to reach their destination. Truly, this was an isolation incomprehensible to us today. Worry would have abounded among members of the battalion, as well as those they left behind. So throughout their journey from the Missouri River to present-day Kansas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California, the battalion encountered extreme difficulties primarily due to 2 factors: lack of water and harsh terrain. Thirst was an immediate threat to their health and survival. You can all appreciate that, being here in a desert. Henry Boyle explained, "We were all weary and fatigued, hungry, nearly naked and barefoot, but our burning thirst drowned out every other suffering." During their travels, the battalion endured several lengthy marches without water. Out of desperation, they often relied on contaminated water sources. This gets a little gross, so hopefully you ate a while ago. One described how they strained water through their teeth to keep back the live as well as the dead insects, and mud from being swallowed wholesale. And after quenching their thirst, they filled their canteens out of the tracks of the oxen and mules. You can only imagine what was in those tracks of the oxen and mules. Others employed some creative methods to attempt to quench their thirst. Some used quills to suck water seeping through cracks in rocks, or they laid down beside mud holes full of filthy water, lapping it like a dog. James S. Brown recounted that he would chew a buckshot or two to induce some sort of moisture on their parched tongues. Melissa Corey carried a smooth stone in her pocket and placed it in her mouth to generate saliva. Another attempted to make the filthy water more tasty by mixing a little flour in some, but the water was so thick with mud that it would admit but a small portion of the flour, and it was like eating clay. Traveling along the sandy Rio Grande River in today's New Mexico caused their shoes to, quote, become so dry and hard that walking was very painful and difficult, and our feet became raw as we tramped on through the sands. We became so weak that it was almost impossible to keep our ankles from striking together as we walked, and our hard and dry shoe tops would cut our ankles till the blood came. The weakened condition of many in the group resulted in 3 detachments being sent north to Pueblo in the first months of the march, which reduced the size of the battalion by 40%. Out of these times of adversity arose wonderful examples that demonstrate the power of attitude and faith in the face of hardship. Several accounts attributed their survival to the merciful Lord. William Corey confessed that nothing could have saved our lives but the unseen hand of Almighty God, and further observed that notwithstanding the intense suffering of the men, there was not much grumbling after all. This lack of grumbling is impressive and reminds me of a profound quote I once heard. Quote, "How easy it is for some to lose our way when the unexpected and seemingly undeserved surface in our lives. Greatness is measured by how well an individual responds to the happenings in life that appear to be totally unfair, unreasonable, and undeserved." Between Santa Fe and Tucson, conditions became more difficult as they exerted intense effort to blaze a wagon trail. To make even minimal progress through the deep sand, they spent hours alternating between pushing wagons and pulling them up inclines with ropes. Some of the most challenging segments of the journey involved the passage over the Guadalupe Mountains, where peaks exceeded 6,000 feet. After summiting, it became necessary to transfer supplies from wagons to pack animals, then laboriously lower the empty wagons down the canyon one by rope. In the months before reaching Tucson, the battalion also had to adapt to several different changes in leadership. James Allen, the man who had helped Brigham Young in recruiting the 5 companies, became sick at Fort Leavenworth and later died. One of the battalion's own officers, Jefferson Hunt, was appointed as interim leader until Lieutenant A.J. Smith caught up with the group. Smith was disliked from the beginning, as many diarists recorded their frustrations over his unnecessary forced marches and his perceived foolish decisions. In Santa Fe, he was replaced by Lieutenant Colonel Philip St. George Cook. These different leadership styles and personalities required compromise and adaptation amid stressful circumstances. So here's another lesson that we can learn. Flexibility and patience are key when we encounter the unexpected. Life's twists and turns most often don't align with our plans and are out of our control. As we make the best of the unpredicted and less than ideal situations like the battalion did in some of these changes, it often promotes personal growth and presents new and unforeseen opportunities. how we respond truly makes all the difference. And we see that time and time again as the battalion faces adversity. The Mormon Battalion had followed well-established routes into Santa Fe. That all changed as they began the arduous task of cutting a new wagon road through uncharted country. They relied on scouts hired by Cook to survey the landscape ahead to locate water sources and identify the most practical routes and campsites. Rations were soon reduced, and sandy roads slowly traveled to a mile or two an hour at times. Pack mules gave out and were so exhausted that they weren't even tied up at night because they were too tired to wander off. This was ground where no wagons before had made a track, and the intense labor involved discouraged the men enough that they unsuccessfully tried to convince Cook to abandon the wagons. But they wearily pressed on towards the San Pedro River and eventually Tucson. Aside from enduring the physical toils, the threat of combat became a reality as the battalion approached Tucson. The Presidio we're on the very grounds of that Presidio, served as a military outpost, largely sustained by local goods and merchants. With the outbreak of the Mexican War, the number of soldiers dwindled here to about 150, with many of those being sent on to Mexico City to defend it against invasion. The battalion members weren't certain what they might encounter as they approached Tucson. As noted earlier, it's easy for us to look back, knowing that the group never engaged in any combat on their journey, and perhaps downplay or ignore the fact that war was a real possibility and a persistent stress on their minds. And despite Brigham Young's promise, the notion and fear that they might have to fight certainly worried them along the way. The possibility of combat seemed inevitable when they received word that a Mexican garrison was stationed here at Tucson. Battalion officers began drilling the men in battle tactics and formations, inspecting arms, and issued 28 rounds of ammunition to each soldier for target practice. The situation escalated when they learned that one of their scouts had been taken prisoner by the Mexican troops, and Cook retaliated by capturing 3 of their soldiers. Warnings to bypass Tucson were ignored by Cook, and the men were, quote, ordered to load our guns and fix bayonets and prepare for a fight if necessary. As the battalion soldiers neared Tucson, Nathaniel V. Jones recorded meeting several men who tried to have us pass around the fort, but the colonel pushed on with double speed until we came to this town. When upon arrival, the soldiers fled, and many of the inhabitants were with them, taking all their public arms, etc. with them. William Corey recorded that the battalion was met by 7 dragoons from the garrison. One of them wanted to know our intentions, whether it was to kill, destroy, and take prisoners, or to pass through peaceably. To which the lieutenant colonel replied that it was to pass through in peace, that they did not come to make war on Sonora, but wished to trade with them for provisions and mules as we were quite destitute. With the situation diffused, Cook marched his parched command through town on December 16th, set up camp, and seized some bushels of wheat that were used to feed both soldiers and animals. According to Nathaniel Jones, several men also purchased from the inhabitants a few beans and a little flour by exchanging our clothes for it. This group of locals would have included Teodoro Ramirez, as depicted in the monument. Another soldier noted that they traded all the clothing that could possibly be spared, but they were not able to obtain much because supplies were limited. After most of the Mexican troops had fled, Henry Bigler noted, "The few people that were left in the place were old men and infirm, with a few children, who were at our mercy and were badly frightened on our approach, but as we showed no sign of fight, they became friendly and very sociable." Tucson provided a welcome reprieve for a couple days. Much of the time was spent resting pack animals and weary soldiers as they were here. Opportunities to rest during their months of marching were few and far between. One member of the battalion savored the idyllic setting Tucson offered, observing, "It looked good to see young green wheat patches and fruit trees and to see hogs and fowls running about, and it was music to our ears to hear the crowing of the cocks." The next day, December 17th, the looming reality of combat returned when about 50 men were assembled to pursue the Mexican garrison and seize their artillery and mules. William Corey became convinced that a battle was inevitable, and his thought turned to his wife Melissa, one of the few women still traveling with the battalion. Quote, I could not help thinking of Mrs. Corey while I was in ranks, wondering what she would do if the battle commenced. But this was one of the places where trust in God was necessary to reconciliation. Thankfully, the plans were aborted, but Corey's statement poignantly illustrates the genuine fear of combat that emotionally burdened the battalion over the course of their march. Henry Standage wrote about how grateful they all were to avoid combat with the Mexican garrison and felt divinely protected. Surely the Lord is on our side, for when we see the advantages the Mexicans had in this town, well defended against musketry, I am led to exclaim that the Lord God of Israel will save his people, inasmuch as he knoweth the cause of our being here. That evening, on December 17th, would be the battalion's final night in Tucson, and an incident reiterates the deep-seated anxiety that they shouldered. At midnight, they were awoken by shrieking bugles when lookouts mistook some residents of Tucson for approaching soldiers. Mayhem ensued as puzzled soldiers scrambled to put on their boots while bumping heads with comrades. And some grabbed their rifles, which were doubling as tent poles, resulting in the, quote, tent coming down and making another bump on heads. The comical scene was recorded by James S. Brown, who said, "We were all trapped in a fallen tent, which was pinned down tight. I was trying to get the left boot on the right foot, and my footwear being rather small, I had no easy job. All being caught in a tent trap, the thought came how easy it would be for a body of Mexican cavalry in a charge to cut us to pieces. And we soon burst through the tent and fell into line." Going forward, Brown noted that he realized the importance of keeping everything in its place so that in a moment's notice, the hand might be laid on clothing and weapons without any mistakes. The next morning, today, December 18th, the battalion's sojourn in Tucson ended as they broke camp and continued their march. I'm guessing they sorely missed Tucson quickly within the following days as they endured a brutal 70-mile stretch of waterless desert and more heavy sand. They followed the Santa Cruz River only to have it sink underground north of Tucson. One soldier noted that they suffered very much for the want of water, and some might have perished if we had not found one or two mud holes about sundown. These puddles, only a swallow to each man, being permitted only to lay down and lap it like a dog, or in other words, to take what we could drink at once. Some of the thirsty men desperately attempted to return to those mud holes that night, but lost their way and wandered about all night. Even the resilient mules, built to withstand such harsh conditions, bellowed piteously all night. Those who were fortunate enough to receive a little water savored it and sipped it down as readily as if it had been choice wine. The extreme conditions brought many to their breaking point. For Henry Boyle, the months of arduous, back-breaking work culminated during this unforgiving stretch, making him feel weakened from hunger and thirst, also from fatigue of our long marches and camp duty. None but ourselves will ever know how much we suffered. Another recalled the visible toll it took on the group. After finding water on one occasion, they scrambled to the water's edge, and after drinking and resting, and again drinking and resting, and continuing this operation for a time, they succeeded in quenching their thirst. But on arising from the ground, he said, we felt that we were not much less than 99 years old. After completing the trek from Tucson to the Pima Indian villages, Colonel Cook was heard to say, any other company under like circumstances would have mutinized. He also stated that he did not know, had he known the situation of the desert, he would have never ventured upon it, and as he had on any account. Finally, as they made their way through the rest of southern Arizona into California, they arrived on January 29th in San Diego, just over 6 months after leaving Council Bluffs. The persistent efforts of the Mormon Battalions established Cook's Wagon Road, which linked roads from Mexico and Santa Fe with Tucson and the Gila. Some portions of their new route were newly carved trails, while others were existing roads, improved to allow for wagon travel. This significantly expanded transportation and commerce in the region. The experiences of the journey through Arizona added to those acquired from between Fort Leavenworth and Santa Fe, and not only strengthened the resolve of the group, but instilled greater confidence they could endure whatever might lie ahead. About 60% of those who enlisted at Council Bluffs made it to San Diego. Upon reaching the coast, David Pettigrew wrote, "We shortly came in sight of the Pacific Ocean, which to us was a good sight, as we had performed a long and tedious march, and suffered many hardships and privations, both with weariness, hunger, thirst, and cold. Most of us were barefoot, and our clothes were very ragged." During their 2,000-mile march, they endured unimaginable hardship, from Santa Fe to the Pacific coast. Although combat was over when they arrived in California, they still had a half a year of military service that they were obligated to fulfill. One company was stationed in San Diego and worked on several public service projects, while most went to Los Angeles to help construct a fort and guard Cajon Pass. The service of the Mormon Battalion in many histories of the Mexican War is merely a footnote, but their list of accomplishments is significant. Opening the first wagon road to the Pacific, helping establish U.S. military control of Southern California, and providing monetary assistance to their fellow Latter-day Saints to migrate to the Salt Lake Valley. In addition, after their discharge, the group continued to make history as they exited California. Several participated in the gold discovery at Coloma that triggered California's legendary gold rush. And others blazed the Carson route over the Sierra Nevada, established Hensley's Salt Lake Cutoff as a viable wagon route, and guided the first wagons over much of the Spanish Trail. Over the last 175 years, their names have truly been held in honorable remembrance to all generations. And each of us is a part of this legacy. It serves as another thread in the tapestry of our collective history. The more I become acquainted with this group, the more I appreciate how difficult it must have been. It is good to be reminded of their sacrifice and grit at commemorative events like this, as it provides some important perspective to each of us. The Mormon Battalion truly embodies the human spirit and our ability to build confidence through adversity. I love a statement made by James Brown as he and some fellow battalion veterans headed east in 1848. Near Sacramento, they began blazing a new trail east over the Sierra Nevada. Due to difficulty in taking the wagons over Donner Pass and the Truckee River along today's Interstate 80, they decided to pioneer a different route through the mountains near the head of the American River. Brown described their reasoning. Quote, "As we had become accustomed to pioneer life, it was thought that we could find a better route." This can-do attitude, it's so matter-of-fact that now they had all this confidence, all this experience from cutting trails in less than ideal circumstances with no water, few supplies. This matter-of-fact, can-do attitude shines through, and it was earned through these months of physical duress in this very region, in this desert. Their self-confidence extended beyond the blazing the trails. It served them for the rest of their lives, as many colonized hundreds of settlements through the Intermountain West, including many that returned to Arizona. We too can overcome difficulties and come away stronger and more confident for doing so. Today we honor and celebrate a remarkable journey across half the continent and the impact of Tucson on that route. But I hope we will also see beyond the achievements and the historical highlights that have been pointed out today. It's important to recognize lessons applicable to us as modern observers. Their example of perseverance, resilience, faith, peaceful exchange across cultures, and relying on one another are both relevant and timely to our 2021 challenges. I find motivation and strength in their ability to dig deep and push through to accomplish difficult things. They were united in supporting and strengthening one another. The obstacles we confront today are different. Or are they? Circumstances and context might differ, but don't we all figuratively bloody our feet and suffer dehydration and exhaustion along our own marches of life? Our struggles come in countless forms of physical, mental, or emotional suffering, or a combination of a multitude of factors. But may the remarkable story of the Mormon Battalion inspire us with increased perspective to draw upon their experiences for encouragement and perseverance. And may we emulate their courage and confidence when we encounter rough times, especially the particularly long and weary days along our own unique journeys. I hope that we might all draw on that inspiration, that we might come to more fully appreciate that. And I leave that with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.